Okay, so once again, here we are with this Jamma 6-in-1 selector. Uh, Many of you know that I'm a forum member over at Classic MK, and one of the other users got himself a dedicated Mortal Kombat 2 with Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 in it. Just a crappy conversion. The T-molding was black, and the control panel they at least put the MK3 overlays on it, but that's it. It still said MK2 across the bottom, and you can see the lightning of the actual MK2 CPO, and just a real crappy conversion. All they did was change out the marquee, the PCB, and add a run button, pretty much. So he's in the process of changing it back to red T-molding, and took off the MK3 overlays to reveal a nice, good clean condition MK2 overlay. And he wants to put UMK3 and MK2, and I believe another one in here also, or in his cabinet anyway. So he bought a 6-in-1 and he sent it to me first, so I could do his mods for him, and then I'm going to send it back to him. So what I'm going to be doing here is explaining the negative 5 volts that has to be done, and the dials that have to be installed for the service menu. First thing I need to talk about and describe is the negative 5 volts. Now, the Jamma harness has negative 5 volts on the component side of the connector. You got a component side and you have a solder side. And on your Jamma connector, it should say on the label that's facing one way or on the other side or the other, there should be a decal or a sticker that shows what every pin does, like coin 1, coin 2, player 1 up, player 1 down. And it'll say on the bottom of it component side, the other side will say solder side, just like this thing does. If you look here, you probably aren't going to be able to read it too well, but this says component side and this says soldering side. And you want to do the corresponding sides whenever you do the mods here. Obviously, since this is the component side, this is your component side connections, and the other side obviously are your solder side connections. Now on the Jamma harness, on the component side, when you snap your Jamma harness onto here, on the component side of the edge connectors, the edge connector pins, the fifth one over is your negative 5 volts. So I believe you have a ground here, you have 12 volts, positive 5 and negative 5. Don't quote me though, I'm pretty sure that's what it is. But, trying to get the good light on here. Let's see. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you look at your switcher here and you get the fifth pin over from the right on the component side, you'll see it's a dead contact. If you look at the contact, there's no pathway that leads anywhere. It's just a dead contact. So what you have to do is solder a wire onto that connection. Fifth over from the right on the component side. You solder a wire onto that connection, then you have to run it around to the back, because on the back side is where you're going to want to attach your solder points to from your wire that's coming off the other side of this. So if you look at here, the component side corresponds to the top row. With your edge connector away from you, the top row of pins is your component side. So what you have to do is start from the top left and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 over. 5 over from the left on your top row is your corresponding negative 5 volts to the fifth one over from the right on this side. It may be a little confusing, but if you follow those directions exactly, you should not go wrong. Fifth pin over from the right on the component side, solder a wire onto that contact and run it to the fifth connection from the top left on the top row of this side. Nothing that you're gonna. Let's see. How do I want to phrase this? You're not going to solder anything to this bottom row. The top row of pins are the only side you're going to be messing with. So if you count over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you solder your negative 5 volts onto that connection. And then if you want to do more slots, all you have to do is just piggyback from here to here to here to here to here to here. Then you can actually put that negative 5 volts on all 6 slots. And that will pretty much handle any board that you want to use for negative 5 volts on your 6-in-1 switcher here. And I'm going to show the after when I get done soldering it. So I guess next I'm going to talk about the easy for me to say, service menu mod. Basically, it's the same type of thing, only instead of the 5th over, it's the 15th. If you count 15 over, you're going to notice it's a dead contact, which is this one right here. This contact right here, I don't know if you'll be able to see, but there's no pathway. Like this one here has a pathway to these capacitors. Actually, they're diodes, D15, D17, they're diodes. But this one right here has no pathway, it's just a dead contact. It's the same type of scenario. You have to actually solder a wire onto this contact, run it around to the back. And we've already established that your top row is corresponding to your component side. So you count 15 over from the left, and you want to solder your wire onto that 15th pin. However, you have to use a diode. Because what's going to happen is that for every board you have plugged in, every other slot, it's going to create a ghost feedback signal. And what's going to happen is if you don't use the diodes, let's say you have board 1 powered on, as soon as you power it up and it gets through its boot test, where it tests all the ROMs, it's going to immediately go into the service menu, and you're not going to be able to escape, because the other boards you have plugged in are going to be creating a ghost ground loop, and it's going to make your machine think that you've got the service button pressed and you're not letting go. So what these diodes do is these diodes block those signals from your other boards. And on the diode, there's a side with a line around one end, and the other end does not have it. The side with the line around it needs to face towards your connector, your Jamma connector. So you have to install one of these diodes, solder the diode onto your 15th contact from the top left over. Then you take your wire that you've soldered onto the 15th contact from the other side around to that diode. So you're going to have a diode on, let's say I'm going to use one on all 6 slots. You're going to have a diode on the 15th pin from the top left over on this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one. You're going to take your wire from here and go to this one. Not on, let's say this diode's installed here. You're going to have a wire soldered onto this part right here. You're going to bring it around and solder it on to the same point on each one. You don't want to go on the side behind the diode. You want to go on the side in front of the diode. So you got all 6 diodes installed. You go to the top of each one until you get back up to your original point that goes around to the back. Well, the front, really. So I hope all that makes sense. If it doesn't, I may have gone through a little fast. Most of you have seen these videos already, but I've been asked to do new ones because that my old account got deleted. So I hope it all makes sense. I kind of went through a little fast, and I talk fast, so see, I just screwed up there. I talk fast, so sorry for that. But I'll try and show you the before product here, then I'll show you the after. Now what I like to do when I solder is get yourself, or myself, I got my wire here. You're going to need a good set of strippers, snap-on strippers, for different sizes and gauges of wires. Good old Radio Shack rosin solder, some diagonal cutters, and some flux. Now what the flux does is when you strip your wire, you want to get some of this flux paste and put it on the bare exposed wires. Then you get some solder on your soldering iron, and it's called tinning. You need to tin the exposed part of the wire with the flux and the solder. Now what the flux does, it actually helps the solder flow and stick to your wires. If you try and solder without the flux, it's hard to get the solder to really stick to whatever you're trying to get it to solder to. This stuff helps 110% when it comes to flowing the solder onto your solder connection or whatever you're trying to do. It makes it adhere way better. You don't have to use it, but it really, really helps out when you're doing any soldering work using some flux paste. Geez, that's hard to say. Flux paste. So I'm going to get all this stuff done, and when I come back for part 2, or when you tune back in for part 2, I'll have it all done and show you the end result and what yours should look like if you try and do this yourself. So hang on and see you in the next part.